Thanks for joining us on this episode of ThriveCAST. I'm joined by Deborah Buelow. She's the founder of Cedar Architecture and a champion of regenerative health-focused design. So she has more than 25 years of experience across New York City, Boston, and the DC area. She's not only shaped architecture at multiple scales, but she's really influenced sustainability and policies, including affordable housing initiatives, and really the architectural community at large. And she walks the talk. So she lives in a seriously tiny house in the woods with her family. I can't wait to dive into this. So that's going to be awesome.
That's weird.
So get ready for a deep dive into how architecture can really be a force for good, both in business and in the built environment. Deborah, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Shannon?
I'm doing really good.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So before we get started, can we talk about the tiny house situation? Because I see this on the home shows. And is it really one of those tiny houses?
It is really one of those tiny houses. It is. And it's funny because I can think of other friends in the architecture industry who are just like, why are you doing this? It is really one of those tiny houses. It's 200 square feet. My husband actually designed and built it. And I mean, there is a whole story there. That's how we met each other. I designed and built a tiny house. We have both of them on our property. One of them, a friend of ours is living in. We are living in the other one. It is not my dream. This is not my dream to live here. I can get into why and how all that happened. I think it was an excellent experience for us as this transitional thing in each of our individual lives. That experience brought us together. And at that time, I thought, I'm kind of interested in this idea of somewhat of discomfort in my living situation to really understand what's necessary for a home, what's necessary for a happy life within your kind of structure, and how can you live really, really meaningfully. So we have to be super considerate, about almost every decision we make. It requires you to stay on your toes and focused.
So beyond the tiny house, let's talk about Cedar Architecture. What motivated you to really establish Cedar Architecture in 2016, right? And how did your experiences at Iowa State University and MIT really influence that decision?
Yeah. Okay, right. So Iowa State, I did my undergraduate at Iowa State, and that was decades ago. So it was really those formative years in the 90s. In architecture in the 90s was a different thing than it is today because we were doing everything by hand. All of our drawings that we pinned up, were hand drawings. We had to learn how to print. And I think all of that just being very useful for my own education. That was an interesting time to be at Iowa State, actually, because they had a huge kind of feminist, let's say, agenda. There were a lot of women in architecture at Iowa State at that time.
That's interesting.
Powerful women in architecture.
Yeah.
So it's very cool to be kind of under their umbrella and already, being a woman, kind of entering that platform, that's how I learned what architecture is. So I guess without realizing it, was already developing my own sense of identity as a woman, as an architect. So that really led me, I don't know, that was just exploratory. What does it mean to be an architect? What does it mean to be a designer? It led me into the next 10 years of my life working in New York. And that's where I began to really understand the kind of technical aspects of how a building gets built. And I'll never forget the first building that I was very instrumental in helping put on paper when I got to go to the construction site. And I'm a 23, 24-year-old, girl, but going to the construction site and seeing them put the studs up to build the walls that I had spent months, laying out on paper. It was a mind-blowing moment. It was just like, my God, what I do matters. What I do materializes. How cool is that? It's just so affirming.
Oh, I love that. So is this what drew you to open up your own firm, or,
right?
What was your motivator?
No, so anyway, moving fast track through that. At one point in New York, I was like, I can't just sit in somebody else's desk forever. So I decided to go to grad school and kind of explore myself as an architect a little bit more. And I would say that I really began to experiment with or I think dig deep into what I do as a designer and how capable am I as a designer. And then after that, I had a series of jobs that just weren't quite filling my bucket,
Your
I
cup.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wasn't setting out to be a business owner. That was never that was not the path that I thought I would take. But I just thought, I'm not going to keep moving from job to job. So I didn't see that I had a different choice. I was like, that's the choice I have. The other factor that really played into that was sustainability. And I want to dig into that word a little bit in our conversation. But, I just felt like everyone is saying that they're sustainable, but what are we doing? Where is it? I don't know how it's showing up. So,
Yeah, that is something I really want to talk about, because prior to us recording this podcast, we did talk about what sustainability means to you and what it means to your design. And your answer floored me, actually. And I was like, I love this status quo. You are challenging it. So let's talk a little bit about what sustainability means to you and what that philosophy is to you growing out Cedar Architecture, because your take on it is fascinating.
okay, so I don't use the word sustainability anymore in our practice. We've eliminated it. I want it to actually just go to the dumps for everybody. I feel like it's such a dated word that isn't serving its purpose anymore. I think it had a really great early momentum and it was a necessary stepping stone. And now it's time for us to do better. So I just had a talk. I just gave a talk about this last week to a group of architects in New Jersey, kind of about the same thing and about what Cedar's approach to sustainable design is, which I am labeling regenerative design. So I'm not coming up with anything new. There are plenty of people using the regenerative category. It just took me a minute to say with any sort of authenticity what I think regenerative design is and how we might actually use it. Yeah, with authenticity. How are we actually using that word? Just like using the word sustainability, how do you use it with authenticity? So actually my first investigations began with what is authentically a sustainable structure. And as I began to dig into that more and more, I began to see that we like to build, even the word itself, sustainable, it's like there's no trajectory to it, right? It just exists. You want to sustain.
Yeah, it's a buzzword.
Nothing in the world sustains. Everything thrives. Everything is growth. Life is growth. And without, I think, capitalizing on the momentum of growth, we aren't sustaining anything. We need to be growing. So that's where regenerative, I think, really comes in. I heard an architect maybe 4 or 5 years ago give a lecture on this. He's an architect educator in the UK, and his name is Stuart Walker. So if anybody wants to look him up, he's got a couple of books. It's great. So he's talking a lot about these topics, and listening to him speak on this is what really kind of drove me in this greater direction of trying to reclaim what we mean when we say we're designing sustainably. So he kind of brought into the history of what sustainability is. So and also this is my own kind of interpretation too, but let's say our human interest in the environment, let's say it got its start in like the 60s and 70s, right? And I always use the founding of the EPA, which was 1970, and the first Earth Day in the United States, which was also in 1970. These things really got their start because of wow, people were looking around like, what are we doing to our planet? We live here. We need to treat it better. And we also need to worry about its effects on us. The great catalyst for this was Lake Erie the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, which feeds into Lake Erie. It had caught on fire multiple times between the 60s and the early 70s.
Yeah, because the oil refineries, right?
From all the sludge, pollution, everything that was just dumping it. They were just dumping it into the rivers, right? And you can see pictures of those rivers. That's disgusting. How were people willing to accept living like that? Okay, so that was the great catalyst. I mean, there were many catalysts, but that was really the tipping point that started the EPA. So that's our start of starting to care. In the 1990s, somebody put a definition to the word sustainability. Okay, what does it mean to be sustainable? And they came up with this kind of 3 three-pronged approach, right? You have to have in equal value. You have to have the social component, you have to have the environmental component, and then you have to have the economic component. And just like a Venn diagram, but with three circles, that meeting point between those three circles, that meeting point, that's the sweet spot for sustainability. And that's what it tells you. And this is where I like Stuart Walker, because he says it misses the mark. And it misses the mark. And he says, and I just totally am in agreement with this, because the economic portion doesn't exist in equal capacity with the social and the environmental. The social and the environmental kind of always have to move along to catch up to the economic. We still use the economic as the bottom line, right? As the determining
Always.
factor.
Right.
And that hasn't changed. And that, like, in our system, doesn't look like it's going to change. But the other thing that he talked about is what really got my heart singing, was he said that this system is also missing a vital component, which is where I think this idea that life is growth, that it is thrive, you're using this word, that it is thriving. That's the spiritual component of the whole thing. So I love the word spiritual. It works for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but it is life. It is what gives life to what we're doing. And it's in every aspect of it, right? It's in the materials. It's in the building. It's how we live in the building. It's in the air that flows through the building. It's in our brains and how we design it. It's in all of it. So that's the part that is missing from the discussion. And I want it to be there.
That's like, it's fascinating. It's fascinating because, the word and, the word environmental and the word sustainability it's very buzz. It's a very buzzword, right? So if everybody's being sustainable, then we're helping the earth. But you have taken it down to another level. And I wanted to talk to you about how Alexandria's Healthy Homes initiative, and did any of this really play into your advocacy or for sustainable and health-focused design within a broader community in the architecture industry, or were they two separate lanes? How did those intersect with one another?
Yeah, they've kind of turned into two separate lanes, but they didn't start out there. So the Healthy Homes Initiative, it's great that the city of Alexandria is doing this. I think it's very much kind of quarterbacked by people within the civic component of the city, right? That fabric of the city. So people who are doing health work, and all within the governmental aspects of it. And they have a very particular view, and their view is we need to help the people in our city, and we need primarily to help the people who don't have a voice, who cannot afford to do it for themselves, right? They're not like, I'm designing high-end housing. They're like, those people are fine. You don't need our help from the government to figure out how to build a healthy home. Totally agree with that, right? So I wanted to be involved in the conversation. I think what was interesting is that they were, number one, surprised that an architect, this kind of private sector, high-end housing architect, wanted to be involved in it. And then it was all a little bit of, what am I going to contribute? But what was so helpful is because I had come up with a metric for how we determine in our office what a healthy home is, what a regenerative home is, what a sustainable home is. I was able to help guide the framework for how they define those things within the city's system. So that was really rewarding, and I think was helpful for all of us to be a part of it. It was helpful for me to help define it, to see it also in these different capacities of housing sort of typologies, and then I think helpful for them to have somebody who's in the building industry talking about this from the building perspective, not just from the social perspective. I think they're very much looking at it from the social perspective. The reason it kind of went into double lanes is because they've gone very much into that, like, we need to be doing, focus groups and surveys and stuff like that. And at that point, I was like, I'm not of use anymore here.
I get it, because they're of government and they need to be able to justify the spend, right, that they're investing into the initiative. So tell me, with your current designs, how do you add health into architecture? Like, what does that mean? How do you embody that approach to, a design of a home that you're designing?
So we have, so it kind of started with this, how do I know that I'm really designing a sustainable home question? I'll just like back out of that for just a second, because, one of the primary reasons that I wanted to really understand that and create a framework is because, if you're working on a commercial structure or bigger building, you have frameworks available to you much more readily, like LEED, like WELL, like FitWell. And these are great frameworks, but they, like, residential clients aren't going to take them on.
Right.
And some of them aren't even available for single family residents. So I thought, well, I still want to do my part, and I still want to know that I'm doing my part. I don't want to just say it. So we developed a framework that we're calling it our Compass Rose, and it's an 8-pointed metric that starts at our project, stays with our project to the end, and allows us to look at it it does allow us to pick it out piece by piece and see, okay, have we addressed this? Have we addressed this? And then doing that with this idea that we're trying to create a living container for somebody. And I don't mean, planting the walls, although that's cool. I mean it in a much more ephemeral way, a living container. But that, along with the very data-driven metrics, I think is how we can kind of achieve it. So we broke it down into these 8 components, looking at the air quality, looking at water quality, sound, thermal quality, materiality is a big one. We look at the resilience quality. And then kind of the overarching, and well, they're all sort of overarching, but this really overarching mind quality, we want to make sure that the house is serving you so that you feel it. You feel good there. And that one is maybe the hardest to ascertain, but also that's the one that's the most rewarding, because that's the one that sends the Christmas card to me at the end of the project and says, thank you.
So back to your 8 points. When you were talking about kind of like the personal one, how do you get your client to be able to embrace this? How do you teach them to really like dive into what it is that they really want to make what you're designing, worthy for them? How do you do that? Because, it's a home is really the heart, but it's when you are just looking at a piece of paper and drawings, it doesn't have so much heart, right? So how do you make that come to life for a client?
Yeah, I'm not making them do anything. Actually, what I think is the most important aspect of this mind quality, the kind of personal one, you could say, is deep listening. I think deep listening is the most fundamental component here. So we have a number of ways that we do that. It's a little bit, honestly, it's a little bit inherent in my personality and in the people that work here, in our personalities, to do it already. But if it's not, you can still make sure that you are deep listening. And what that means is hear what your client says, hear them again, and then repeat to them what you think you've heard, so that they have a chance to tell you whether or not that was what they meant. And then asking a question over and over again in different ways, like, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Somebody's going to say, I need a house. Yeah, but why? Like, asking the why question over and over again. Well, why do you need a house? Well, because our house is insufficient. Okay, but why is it insufficient? Well, because we only have 2 bedrooms and we need 3. Well, why do you need 3? Because we have a baby coming. And why, and it eventually gets down to, because I don't know how to store everything, and I feel very cluttered here, and it makes my mind crazy. And you're like, okay, so now we have actionable things we can resolve here. Let's work on the clutter. Let's work on, and yes, maybe a 3rd bedroom is what you need.
Mm-hmm.
Let's work on addressing these things, but that is what you need. What you need is to feel good in your home. And what I need to do is to work, deeply to understand what makes you feel good in your home.
So do you have a favorite project that you've done recently that you just felt absolutely nailed your vision and nailed, the vision of the client? Is there something that you just want to tout?
Yeah, I do actually. It just finished. We just finished our first passive house. Should I explain passive house
Yes,
or yeah.
please. I've
Okay.
never heard of
So
that.
passive house it's a design certified currently passive house, which is with the Passive House Institute of the United States. So the entire design and build process was very structured and incredibly detailed to make sure that what we're doing is designing according to the passive house principles, which means you first introduce, they have kind of 5 concepts that you really first work on to make a very tight envelope around the structure. House doesn't mean house only, it can also be a building, but you create a very tight envelope, airtight, insulation tight, use good quality windows and doors. And then you need to also bring in filtered fresh air. And then you can begin to reduce the mechanical components, so thereby requiring less energy usage and less energy needs for the house. So that is, in very quick terms, what a passive house is. So we just finished our first passive house and we just got it photographed. Hopefully we'll submit it for some awards. We'll see if it goes anywhere. But that was incredibly satisfying. It was a 4-year design and build process.
Oh my gosh.
And it was a very intimate experience where I now feel like the homeowners are my good friends.
Oh,
We've gotten to know, like, the amount of times we've talked about where they're going to be drinking coffee and where to store the cups. And, these kind of things are like, okay, do you need to spend time on that? Well, we did. We needed to spend time on that because it's what makes the house for them flow. I think we really achieved all of those 8 metrics in this house, maybe some to greater degree than other, but I think we really did here.
so what do you think are like some of the significant challenges that you've had to face in promoting this form of architectural thought? Like, has there been any challenges or any, roadblocks where people are like, I don't know.
I think disinterest is a big one. It's like, it's still a little bit, people are like, what does a house have to do with my health? I go to a doctor, I eat well. Why do I care if my house is healthy?
Yeah.
That doesn't really matter that much. So I think there is like an educational component, this degree of disinterest, because I'll say with each of those metrics, you can tie all of it back to human health. So
Yeah,
the air quality in your house impacts your health. Right?
totally.
The thermal quality in your house impacts your health. There's data behind this. I'm not speaking like just qualitatively. I'm speaking quantitatively. We can actually prove this stuff. And there's a lot of really smart people who are researching this and documenting it. That is not me, right?
Right,
I'm just taking their information.
right. So have you had like pushback and they're like, well, this sounds fluffy, right? Like, but it's not. This is really ingrained in everything that you believe as an architect. Has it been more of a like an education evolution with your customers to be able to help them understand, the premise of why you do the things that you do? Or has it just been that they're already on board because they've done their research and like, what does that look like?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're starting to see that now that our clients are coming to us for this vision. It kind of took a little while to get there, but we're getting there. I think a lot of the pushback is monetary. So it's again that, this what they call the triple bottom line, right? The sustainability, the economic, environmental, social. It's still the economic driver. So if I say you need to improve the air quality in your house, they say, okay, what does that mean? I say, well, I don't know. The biggest end is you could put an ERV system in. And they say, I can't afford that. I'm not going to do it. The air quality is fine. How can you prove the air quality is not fine? Okay. So I think economic is the greatest challenge there. And, education starts somewhere. And once it becomes a little bit more commonplace, part of our sort of mass consumer culture of society,
Yeah.
hopefully then it will be a little bit easier.
So let's talk a little bit about marketing and how that feeds into your field. So, I mean, architecture is incredibly competitive. So, what sort of like marketing or communication approaches have you found most effective in attracting clients to Cedar Architecture? How do they find you?
Yeah. This is not my strong suit. So we've just started going through kind of a rebranding.
Mhm.
so that we can really push some of this. Right now, we, sort of loosely on the website say we are sustainable, we are holistic, health driven, but we're working on a rebranding to really push that aspect forward. So that'll be through our website, through our social media. The way that people find us is starting to be a little bit through social media and just searching for architects who are interested in, sustainability or health. So I guess a minor amount through kind of Google searching like that.
Mhm.
Majorly in terms of marketing, I do a lot of speaking and events. I just try to get us out there and talking about it just
Yeah.
because I want to be involved. I want to be involved in the community to give back to the community, to try to address the importance that I think that this plays in the community. And because I don't mind doing that. So it's an easy thing to do.
Well, and you are clearly passionate about it. You can just hear that in your voice and in how you tell the story. I mean, there's a really deep connection there, which I can definitely appreciate because in speaking to all of these other architects that I've spoken to, your approach is very different than those others that I'm speaking to. So I feel like from a marketing perspective, this is your unique differentiator. This is what makes you different. This is what makes you, a non-competitor because there's not many that are doing what you're doing in the industry, at least from what I've seen. Not that I know a whole lot about it, but that's what makes you guys special. And I think that that's what's really important. By the way, the front image on your website is phenomenal. I don't know how or where you took
That's
this.
the house that I'm talking about. Yeah.
It is like jaw-dropping, like it drew me in. So it's a very good image for your website. So bravo
Thank
to
you.
you for picking out that image as your face. It's very good. So moving on to that, I mean, what do you think in 2025 and beyond? What do you think are those emerging trends in design and architecture that you're most excited about? And how do you think Cedar Architecture is really going to try to integrate those innovations? And I mean, you yourself are innovative, so maybe you're the trend because
Yeah,
it's
it'd be fun if we were.
yeah. I mean, this is very innovative. But what do you see in design and architecture as, what you're most excited about moving forward?
Yeah, I'm so excited about bio-based trends. So we, in fact, just had a meeting in our office 2 hours ago. We're going to start developing a new project we're going to actually, this is totally a prototypical thing, just so we can see if it's possible. We want to design and actually build our own. Right now, the program I'm not totally sure about, we're calling it either a meditation hut or like a small wellness space or something. But we're planning on designing and actually building a small structure that is completely built out of bio-based materials. So we are predominantly interested in the use of rammed earth. And then potentially we want to look at a thatched roof. I mean, we want to try and also kind of a rammed earth floor. We want to be able to at the end say that every single thing that went into it is somehow regenerative, or I don't like the word recyclable because that is another kind of gimmicky word, but is somehow regenerative in its nature. So let's see. Well, let's see if it's going to happen. We're planning on finishing. We've kind of laid out a timeline. We're planning on having it in construction by the end of this year.
Where is this going to be built at?
So it's a prototype that we're going to build on my land. We have 5 acres, so we'll build it there to test it out, to see, the kind of overarching idea is, can the region that I'm in, which is the Mid-Atlantic, very humid, very hot in the summer, mildly cold in the winter. We did have a decent snowstorm this winter. Can an earthen structure survive our climate? And is it feasible? So that's kind of the goal, to see what happens.
What an audacious goal to be able to work towards. I love that. You'll have to keep me posted on how this is going. It would be great just to meet with you again and talk about the phases of what you went through to be able to build something like this, because it's so unique. And I mean, again, if this is where the future is heading, and I think it is, you are laying the groundwork for the entire industry to be able to learn from. So that's kind of awesome. Isn't that exciting?
So I think we want to make it commonplace. I don't think we're trying to be so niche. I think we're trying to make the niche come into the market.
Yeah, but
Let this be something we all do.
I think that's easier said than done, right?
Yeah,
Like,
totally.
so yeah, and again, if it was commonplace, everybody would embrace it. And I think that it's funny because on both coasts in California and then on the East Coast, New York and beyond, there's more of an embrace there. There's more of a welcoming aspect to it. But then the middle of the country, I'm not sure fully understand and grasp that. So it's great to see how you're going to build that, and hopefully it'll trickle inward and others
Yeah.
will gravitate towards it. So what advice would you offer like an emerging architect who really aspires to start their own firm with a focus on health and, again, the buzzword sustainability, but what advice would you give them?
Probably just what I like to do, which is ask questions, both of yourself and of everyone in the industry. Don't accept anything kind of verbatim. Really test and understand what's the meaning behind, or what's the intent behind your statement? What's the intent behind this movement? Why does it matter? Where do I fit into it? And what else can I do? What's the next thing that we can do to kind of move the needle?
And so how do you balance the creative aspects of architecture with essentially the practicalities of running a successful business? How do you manage that?
I think it's through a lot of like very heavy calendar organizing. I spend Fridays and Sundays and sometimes Monday mornings just really making sure that I understand what the week looks like, what needs to get done, and having an awesome team who is, capable of keeping the design flowing, even if I'm not.
Well, you always have to, you surround yourself with people that are always smarter than you to make you
That's the
most,
point, right?
right, to make you most successful. So I would have to bank on that as well. So what is the one thing that we should take away from Cedar Architecture that you just want everybody to remember, as like, a touch point for who you are in this industry? Because you're really unique, really unique. So what does that leave behind that you would like to tell our audience?
I think it is this idea that sustainability is dead. So what does that mean for all of you? What does that mean for everybody? And it's time to step up to the next challenge. How do we actually design in harmony with the planet and in harmony with our health? And understanding that if we put our focus there on these things, we will be designing good structures.
Yeah, I love that.
Designing with intention.
And that's the most important. So one other question I have for you is, are you only focusing on single family homes, or do you focus on multifamily homes? What is your primary bread and butter at your firm?
Yeah, single family is our primary. We finished recently a very sweet small school, well, not terribly small, but a Waldorf school local to our area, which is completely, their entire concept is based in similar principles as ours. So it really blended well together. Yeah, we'll do smaller commercial structures like this. I think we're very keen to get into the wellness industry, which we've done a little bit of, not a lot of. So I think we would like to sort of pivot to some degree in that direction. But residential is really satisfying because I just really love working with people and people who are impacted immediately by the work that we do.
I want to thank you for coming on and being part of this podcast that's really meant to support architecture, engineering, and construction firms, because I think that you have a really interesting point of view that should be talked about more. And I don't think it's being talked about enough. So bravo to you for really pushing that envelope in the discussion points. I'm sure you've been part of the AIA forever, and I'm sure you've spoken through the AIA, but I just think that your story is something worthy of listening to. It's very inspiring. So thank you for joining me.
Yeah, let's check back in with each other in a year, and maybe I'll have some photos to show you.
Yeah, and I can't wait to hear about, this new innovation that you've got and how the building is going. And you'll have to share photos of your most recently finished product. And I can't wait to share it with the world. Super cool.